Welcome. I am Lucinda Curran, your host for the Environmental Sensitivities Symposium, a world first event. And today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Jo Immig. Hi Jo, how are you?
Hi Lucinda, I'm well, thank you.
Let's talk about the work that you do.
Well, at the moment I'm the coordinator of the National Toxics Network, and that's a non-government organisation that works to provide a toxic-free future for all people. That's our ultimate goal. So we do that work primarily focused at trying to bring about systemic change within governments, within society, so that we can be clear where we need to make changes with toxic chemicals in our lives. I also have other work that I do in this field where I write articles for popular magazines and things, once again with educational bent to help people understand what are some of the toxic dangers in their everyday lives.
That's really amazing, the stuff that you do, and I know you work at helping the government understand changes that need to be made as well.
Yes, in our work with the National Toxics Network, it inevitably involves working with governments because they're the ones that make the laws and the rules, and we are often called upon to sit on expert committees and to make submissions to various inquiries and things. And in that way, we do get to interface with government and departments quite frequently and be able to take to them the community's concerns about where they're not getting enough information or there's not enough regulation about certain things. And in that sense, we've worked very closely with the government over the last 25 years.
And how did you come to do this work?
That's a good question. I studied environmental science at the University of Technology in Sydney. It was a very new degree at the time. It was an applied science degree. And I specialised in ecotoxicology, which really fascinated me. After I finished my degree, I got a volunteer job at the Total Environment Centre, which is one of New South Wales' leading environment groups. And they had a toxic chemicals committee, which was made up of some lovely elderly gentlemen who were ex-biochemists and chemists, and I was assigned to this committee as a volunteer, having had the science degree. And basically they just completely opened my eyes to the world of chemical pollution, and I rapidly learned a lot from them, and I went on to become the toxic chemicals campaigner at the Total Environment Centre for over 10 years, and that's where I really got to grips with this topic and learned how environment groups and community can make change. After that, I went on to work in the New South Wales Parliament, where I learnt even more closely how laws are made and how lobby groups can influence the government. And after I finished that job, I then took on the role of the coordinator of the National Toxics Network, and I've been doing that work now for over 12 years.
It's an incredible story, and I think what really excites me about it is understanding that you've got such a really thorough understanding of how people can make a difference.
Yes, it's a very interesting area to work in because it does require quite a lot of technical understanding, which having a background and education in science really helps. But even then, it's a very specialised area, so I have to keep doing a lot of reading and talking to a lot of other people who work in this field. That's one thing, but it's another thing altogether to develop the skills to interface with government and government departments and to know how that system works so that you can try and bring about change. And also just how to work within a non-government organisation and what's their role in our society and how they can bring about change and be a real conduit for community concerns to government. So there's skills across a broad range of area really for all of the people within the National Toxics Network and other organisations that do this kind of work to be able to be effective in what we're trying to bring about, which is really systemic change for the future so that we can have a toxic-free future.
And it's a fantastic goal, isn't it? It's something just so worth working towards.
It is, and some days I feel a bit pessimistic, to be honest, because there's a lot of toxic things out there that need sorting out. Other days I think, well, we're making progress. And then other days I think, well, it has to be done, so there's no getting away from it. I mean, it's a kind of part of the evolution of our species that we need to come to terms with the fact that many things that we are doing are unsustainable and we need to change the way we do them. And I think looking at it through this lens of toxic chemicals really helps in the bigger sustainability discussion, because you start to look at materials and choices of materials and how they're made, how they're manufactured, and then how they're disposed of after we're finished with them. And that whole life cycle of materials is a great area for toxic chemical management within that.
And it sounds too that your work with the National Toxics Network is almost like a marrying together of all your previous work and study.
Yes, it's fascinating how life builds like that. I mean, if someone said to me when I was at university, this is what I'd be doing, I would have thought, no way. But you develop an expertise and a passion for a certain area, and then you meet various people along the way who really inspire you. And before you know it, you've been doing something for over 30 years. That's how it tends to go.
It's beautiful. And did you have a personal story or experience with chemicals or anything that sparked your interest to begin with?
Several things happened along the way for me. Studying at university, I was actually finishing my last year part-time because I needed to work. And I worked in the laboratory at the university as a lab assistant. And I was absolutely gobsmacked that here I was studying ecotoxicology, and yet I was in the back room, pouring everything that was in the test tubes down the sewer. And some light bulb went on there, and I suddenly realized that so many of these things around me could potentially be toxic, and we didn't even question it because you're doing an experiment and they put chemicals out in the test tube and you just use them. Obviously, you've got safety things going on in laboratories, but so that was one thing which was really like a light bulb moment. And then I was later renting a house, a small house in Sydney with some other people, and we were asked to move out for a couple of days because they were coming in to do a termite treatment. And I didn't like the idea of it at the time, but I thought, well, what can we do, because they're going to do it and it's where we're living. So we moved out for the weekend, and when we came back, the place just really stank of pesticides. And I didn't really put one and one together at that point, even though I knew it wasn't good. But I later went on to realize that I'd walked back into an organochlorine treatment, and it really affected my health at that point. And I really determined to become much more educated about those sort of everyday opportunities where people can become poisoned through no fault of their own. And that was another light bulb moment and a turning point as well, and one that really did show to me that I was actually a person who was very sensitive to chemicals. I ended up going to naturopaths and things who explained that to me at the time. Of course, it's not good for anyone to be exposed to chemicals, but because of my particular constitution, if you like, that I was quite susceptible, and I became aware of that at an early age, which was helpful.
It's incredible that these daily things just occur, and you said at the time you didn't put one and one together, but chemical usage is ubiquitous in our world at the moment, and I think for you, in the context of your study and then your work, it's really helped shape your approach.
It has, absolutely. I think one of the biggest moments of realization that we have in terms of the bigger environmental health issue is when you realize that these things aren't happening out there somewhere away from me. They actually do involve everything that you do. So every time you go to a shopping mall, or you catch public transport, or you fill your car up with petrol, or you buy something and bring it home, I mean, these are all opportunities when you may be exposed to chemical pollutants that your body could probably do well without being exposed to. And it's made me a lot more thoughtful about my actions and what I do and where I go, rather than oblivious. Occasionally I think it would be rather blissful to be ignorant because I know too much, and I sometimes have to switch off because I'm in a particular situation and I think, well, I'm here, I just have to make the best of it, because there are so many scenarios these days where you potentially are being exposed to toxic chemicals. I really don't necessarily want to become a person who can't interact with the world, so I sort of try to keep a balance going there.
And it would be a balancing act as well. It took me a long time. I used to grow all my own veggies, and the things I wasn't growing I was washing in the sink and tipping out the water on my veggie garden rather than letting it go down the sink.
Yeah.
And then one day I went, hang on a minute, that's all the pesticides and herbicides and all of that, all concentrated in that water that I'm tipping on my organic produce.
Yeah.
It's just everywhere.
It is. It's incredible. And, I still have light bulb moments where I think, why didn't I think of that before? It's amazing. We just get sucked in by a lot of advertising. Our lives are such that they're busy and things are put in front of you in a convenient sort of way and you go for it. It can be quite hard to constantly walk the path where you're seeking out the most sustainable, the least toxic. If you have a busy life, it can take a lot of time. So thankfully, even over the last 30 years, I've seen an enormous growth in the availability of healthier, cleaner organic food, in things that you need for babies or cosmetics or whatever it is. We used to dream about having safe makeup, and now you can actually buy it if you want to. So I think there is progress, but when I look at the bigger picture, I still get a little bit despondent because while we've made improvements, certainly in some areas, overall, I'm afraid to say I think we've gone backwards with respect to chemical pollution.
It's a lot sad to hear that, isn't it?
It is. The reality is that we use more industrial chemicals today than we ever have at any other time in human history, and that we're hearing things like the ocean's full of microplastics. We know that the air's full of chemicals, that water has chemicals. So it's these basic aspects of life. If we're not even able to breathe clean air and drink clean water and swim in a clean ocean, then I think we're really fouling up the nest, and it's very hard to try and live the toxic-free life when you are surrounded by so many things. And I think we still have a long way to go. It's to do with things being invisible. I think out of sight, out of mind, people don't understand that there can be invisible chemical pollutants there that might not make them sick in this instant, but if they keep being exposed to them for 20 years, it might. And it might affect their children in the next generation as well. So that's a very hard message to communicate to people, but I know that there is an increasing appetite and enthusiasm from people to know that information and to want to make the right choices. It's just that it really needs to become the natural way of life rather than it being the odd thing that you've got to try and seek out. I mean, I'd love to see those things just being the norm rather than the norm being all the toxic things and we have to work so hard to find the untoxic things.
I'm hearing you, but as you say, the changes over the last decades have been enormous, and not only is there the option to choose, say, the non-chemical cosmetics and personal care products, but there's a choice of them now.
That's
which
right,
there never was.
Yeah, a growing choice, which is wonderful. And I remember when I used to first buy my box of home-delivered organic veggies 30 years ago, and it used to come from the outskirts of Sydney, and it would arrive once a week, and it was, compared to the chemical food at that time, it certainly was, like little apples with black spots and things, and I totally loved it because it was organic. But organic food has just come so far, I think, in 30 years. The abundance of it and the health of it, I think we've really got a group of people enthusiastic about growing organic food now, and that skills and knowledge base for knowing how to grow a diversity of crops in Australia. It's just enormous. Used to be one or two organic farms that everything came from, and now there are just so many. That's a wonderful improvement.
It is, and it's so exciting. Now, everybody, Jo Immig will be a speaker at the Environmental Sensitivities Symposium. To find out more, you can head on over to environmentalsensitivities symposium.com.